Hey guys, and welcome to the Animal Training Academy podcast show. I'm your host, Ryan Cartledge, and I'm really excited that you have decided to take time out of your busy schedules to come and hang out with us today. We're really grateful for you tuning in. And if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, we really appreciate this. Thank you so much. Hopefully you have subscribed so that you never miss an episode, but if not, or if you are new to the show, get yourself over to iTunes, Stitcher, animaltrainingacademy.com, or whatever it is you are listening to this podcast on, and hit the subscribe button to make sure you don't miss a single episode. We are bringing you today's episode on behalf of the Animal Training Academy or ATA membership. If you like the conversations in these podcasts, then I want to invite you to continue them with like-minded people within the ATA membership area, which you can find out more about over on the Animal Training Academy website. Some of the ingredients of the membership include forums with hundreds of training videos and projects where together the community helps problem solve different training situations. We then have the private Facebook group where we share animal training successes, member updates, and relevant content from the web. On top of this, we have WhatsApp chat groups with separate group chats for horses, dogs, cats, birds, exotic animals, and more. And then to top it all off, we connect live twice a month in members-only web classes where we dive even deeper into the topics you learn about here. All previous web class replays are additionally stored for you to watch at your own convenience. A member recently called this the Netflix for behavior nerds. So to find out more about membership and how you can join the community and carry on the conversation, visit www.animaltrainingacademy.com and click the membership button in the main menu. But we will get started on today's episode, where I'm very fortunate to be talking to one Jim Mackie. Jim was appointed the Zoological Society of London, ZSL's first animal training and behaviour officer in 2012. Having previously demonstrated the value of trained behaviours to improve husbandry and welfare in the zoo's living collections. Jim's interest in animal behaviour began when he trained his own raptors for educational demonstrations 25 years ago. This led to an opportunity to join ZSL's animal display department, where he worked for 10 years developing the zoo's visitor education program. Jim soon realised that the techniques associated with training animals for demonstrations could be transferred to all the animals in the zoo. Jim's passion for sharing information in the field of operant learning and behavioural enrichment led to the formation of ZSL's behaviour management committees at both London and Whipsnade Zoo, and later the BIAZA, the British and Irish Association of Zoos and Aquaria, Animal Behaviour and Training Working Group, which he chairs. In this capacity, Jim is now working with the Animal Behaviour and Training Council to create a formalised education and accreditation program for animal trainers in zoos and aquaria. Jim is also a member of the EAZA, European Association of Zoos and Aquaria Training Group, and is an EAZA Academy instructor. In 2015, ZSL was a recipient of a BIAZA Gold Award in the welfare category for its work in establishing a coherent, collection-wide animal training program for veterinary and husbandry care. At present at London Zoo alone, there are around 100 species of mammals, birds, reptiles, and fish participating in training programs for husbandry across all animal departments, and the number of species involved and the variety of behaviours being trained is constantly growing. So without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to welcome Jim to the show today. Jim, how are you?
Oh yeah, hi Ryan. Really great to be involved in this. All good today, yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm really excited to have you here, Jim. And for everyone listening, me and Jim actually got to catch up when you visited New Zealand last month. So it was great to meet you in person. I don't often get to say that on this podcast.
Yeah, it was really great to catch up and join you for a single craft beer. We didn't go mad, but it was really lovely to see you in Wellington. What a place New Zealand is. Recommend it to anyone that gets a chance to visit there.
And if you come this way, send me a message and we'll catch up for a craft beer. We're going to dive straight into the first question today, Jim. Could you please take everyone listening back to where you first started to learn about positive reinforcement animal training and maybe share some stories of some of the first animals you ever trained using it?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I come from the world of falconry, if you like. The first exposure I had to trained behaviour was through falconry, and of course traditional falconry methods, although they incorporate things like positive reinforcement, isn't part of the teaching. So when I was learning about this when I was 12 years old, many years ago now, I was in a different type of world. So I started to really learn about positive reinforcement training. And when I was working here at London Zoo, on the education department, and our education department back then included our display team, which provided educational demonstrations for the visiting public, and so the first animal I actually trained for using positive reinforcement was a little meerkat called Mara. And Mara wasn't really going to be part of our demonstrations. She was more of a VIP encounter animal, if you like, for our paying guests. And we started to train her, and she just came on so well. And in fact, if anyone's trained a meerkat, you'll know that they make you look good as a trainer because they're incredibly intelligent. They're amazing problem solvers, and of course they need to adapt to different things in the environment. So they're perfectly tuned in for learning. And so it really excited me that the using positive reinforcement with this little meerkat could give you such fast and amazing results. And she ended up being part of our demonstration team of animals for many, many years after that. And so that was probably the very first time that I'd single-handedly, if you like, trained an animal from scratch. And all I remember is feeling this incredible sense of wonder that these animals can learn so quickly using 100% positive techniques.
So was it a natural transition for you then to apply what you had learned working in falconry to Mara, or did you have to pause then and discover new information and new ways of doing things? How did you transition into that?
Well, to be honest, that's a really interesting question because I don't know what other people that have trained animals, what experiences that they've had. But certainly for me, throughout the time that I've been training animals right up to the present day, I keep having to rewire. And I, particularly during that phase when I was, if you like, unlearning the stuff that I'd learned through falconry techniques, and then into the positive reinforcement world, I had to completely change the way I thought about the way that animals work. Now, the thing is with flying birds of prey free, is that you still have to have an incredible sensitivity in order to make sure that those birds have the experience of flying free and the enrichment that provides, but also then to want to come back to you. And so you have to have a degree of sensitivity. It is using a reward-based training in the once that they've gone over that initial stage. But certainly, I think any trainer will probably tell you that they've had to rethink the way that they look at animal behaviour in order to become better trainers. And so the transition from falconry to positive reinforcement was certainly something that made me think a lot about the way that animals work and the way that behaviour works. And then later on, when I started to apply it into the veterinary and husbandry care field that I now focus on here at the zoo, I had to think about it all over again because the majority of work that we do with our animals, and particularly the larger category 1 animals, is of course using protected contact. And so again, it's a different kind of thing. Now, the falconry world is one sort of element of training, but we also used positive reinforcement for our free flight birds, things like parrots and hornbills and toucans. So we'd started to develop those skills early on in the early 90s here at London Zoo.
That makes a lot of sense what you said. So you're working with these birds of prey and you're at that young age. Did you say you were 12 when you started doing that?
Yeah, that's right. I was lucky enough to learn from some UK experts at the British School of Falconry. So this was a residential course that I did over a course of 3 summers, which I absolutely loved. And I still have a great fondness for the world of falconry and the kind of passion that people that are falconers have for not just birds of prey, but also for the natural world.
And working with these amazing animals helped you develop that sensitivity that was required to do things like get them to come back to you, which you mentioned. and then you went to work with Mara, and you said you were blessed because you got to work with a meerkat, and they're great problem solvers, and they're highly intelligent. Sounded like that was a great recipe for your first animal, would you say? You've still got to kind of pay that close attention and use your sensitivity, but you've got this highly engaged animal in front of you as you learn this new craft.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I'd been lucky enough to be exposed to some of my colleagues who are still working in zoos, actually. Andy Hallsworth up at Banham Zoo in the UK. He's still doing demonstrations, and I learnt a lot from him and Rob, my other mentor, in that world. And we trained some amazing animals for these experiences. So, we had caracal lynx, and we had ring-tailed coatis, kookaburras, green-winged macaws. There was black and white ruffed lemurs, kinkajous, you name it. We were working with these animals, and it was all through positive reinforcement. And so yeah, really, I was really lucky to be able to work in close contact, but with all these animals and learn from those people. But the first time that I'd trained an animal by myself and given this project was the meerkat. Now, I had trained animals previously, and I had my own birds. So I had a common buzzard, and I had a barn owl, and I used to love working with those. And when you're one-on-one with these animals in your own home, and then you get to share your passion for these species with children's groups and schools that I used to take those birds to. I've always felt very lucky, and in fact, one of the things that I feel strongly about, and from my point of view, is as animal professionals, it's our duty, if you like, to share our stories and share our passion for these species with the younger generation. And I don't do quite as much of that as I'd like to now, because my role has changed so much, and I just focus on the animal welfare provision through animal training and enrichment. But I still have that kind of that passion for sharing our interest in, or my interest in the natural world.
Well, I think that's what we'll name this podcast, Jim. It's our duty to share our passion with the younger generation.
Very good.
I love that. Hey, thank you for sharing. I love hearing about people's behavioural odysseys. Moving forward, we've learned a little bit about your role when you started at ZSL and your bio that we just shared, but I'd really like to learn more about this. Can we dive a bit deeper? What's it like in 2018 being the Animal Training and Behaviour Officer at ZSL?
Well, it's multifaceted because the role itself was brand new when we started it in 2012. There wasn't this role, and in fact, animal training was happening across both our zoos, London and Whipsnade Zoo, and there was lots of it, and it was incredibly professionally done. Things like tiger blood draws were done at Whipsnade Zoo a decade ago. We started with Malayan tapir husbandry training again a decade ago in 2006. So there was plenty going on, but there wasn't a coherent approach to it across the society. So one of the things that we wanted to do by establishing this role was to create that consistency and the coherence, and so that when we're planning and recording these training programs, it was done the same way across the board. The actual training, of course, is never the same because everyone's got their own methods, but what we try and do is make sure that the planning and recording process and the fact that we're all using the same techniques of positive reinforcement are acknowledged and delivered across the board, across all of the animal departments. So when I first started, I used to train animals all day long. That's all I did. And I'd have certain projects that I would go and support. Then I would talk to the teams, and we'd talk about was animal training. It was an amazing period of time, particularly working with our Sumatran tigers that were new into the zoo at the time. But as the role developed now in 2018, one of the things that I do most of is teaching keepers, because we made a decision a couple of years ago that instead of creating a department that was responsible for animal training with lots of personnel, partly because obviously it's difficult to fund, but also because there was a vision that instead of it being isolated to a specialist department, that we'd have every single animal caregiver across the living collections with an ability to train an animal. And so my focus very much these days is on passing on the skills that we've developed over the course of the 10, 15 years that we've been working with positive reinforcement training for husbandry and veterinary care. But also applying and so we're trying to pass on those skills, and we're trying to apply it to everybody across the board, so that everyone has a good understanding of behavioural science and its practical application in the zoo community. So right now in 2018, yes, I get to train animals, which is probably the best part of my job, but I also get to teach, which I think is also incredibly important. And in terms of the long-term goals that we've set up in our strategy, that's probably the best way to achieve it, is that everybody is trying their best to use positive reinforcement and considering behaviour science when they're applying their animal husbandry on a daily basis.
You're really great to hear about, and I'm pretty confident there's people that listen to this podcast that are at different stages of the journey that you've been through. Some people are at similar stages than you. Some people are in zoos where they might have been in a role that shares similarities to yours for a number of years. And some people, I know some personally who are right at the start of this journey, and their position in their organisation has just been created with regards to there being a specific individual to head all of this stuff up. So considering that, and I'd like your input on this as well, zoos and more zoos are creating these roles now. What advice do you have to give to people, specifically people that might be at the start of this journey, who are trying to achieve what you've achieved at ZSL, and obviously it's an ongoing thing? What advice do you have to give to those people that might be starting out on this journey?
It's a really interesting question because, like I said to you before, when this role started, it was brand new. And so it's evolved kind of organically. But if I was to look back and think of the most significant things that helped us to start this off in this journey, if you like, it would be that in order to create a kind of a groundswell of opinion towards the use of animal training as to improve animal welfare, it almost has to start from the bottom. And so, for example, at ZSL, 2 or 3 years before we created the role of animal training officer, we started the behaviour management committees at both zoos. And this was completely done by zookeepers. So we had no financial backing. We did it all in our own time. And it was an opportunity for all the keepers, a representative of each animal department, and we also had horticulture involved and other areas that we believe important for behaviour management. And we all used to get together and share our stories, and then we would present those stories to the wider zoo community. And so this kind of groundswell of opinion and of us sharing our passion for this subject, us keepers, it almost created this interest in the field. And so from that moment onwards, it was really easy for the managers to be able to go to the people that hold the purse strings to say, this is something we want to promote. We believe in this because it's going to be good for animal welfare. And we've got a person that can head this up. And so my advice is a lot of the time to people that are kind of starting the journey as you talk about is to create an interest within the keeping community. And sometimes we feel a little bit powerless as we're the ones that are doing the work, doing the actual animal training, doing the animal caregiving. But sometimes we feel a bit powerless because we're not in charge of making decisions. But someone said, a guy called Mark Kingston Jones, who's a shape of enrichment instructor, and he also sits on the Behaviour group, behaviour, animal training and behaviour group. He said, we do have the power because we're the ones in the front line. We're the ones working with the animals. We can make a difference on a daily basis. And so even if we don't feel like we have the power to make these huge decisions, if we create a kind of groundswell and we start to develop groups that are specialised in this field, and then we show people just what success we can have using these disciplines, then I think that's the way to start. And then once the position's in place, one of the I think a really important thing is to kind of try and get some kind of policy created. If you can plan and record things really efficiently and professionally, that is a really brilliant start for a coherent training program across your zoo. And one way of doing that is to create guidelines or a policy statement for your organisation. For example, we wanted to encourage people when they were looking at non-emergency procedures, whether it's for, say, an export, a transfer of an animal from one enclosure to another, or a trip to the vet or a veterinary procedure. If it was a non-emergency procedure, so we're planning it in advance, check the viability of using an alternative to manual or chemical restraint, which was the traditional husbandry techniques. And that formed the basis of our policy. That helped us develop our training program, because we were able to say, one of the main ways that we can help achieve this change and these alternatives is through trained behaviour, cooperative trained behaviour. And so, if you like, they're my two bits of advice is between us as animal caregivers, we can make a huge difference by kind of coming together and creating the desire and the passion for this subject. But then also, once we are established and there's these people, these figureheads, the training officers, then we need to be very professional and make sure that everything's planned and recorded properly and that we have guidelines in place.
Well, I'm feeling inspired after listening to you talk just then, Jim. They are some very actionable things. Some guidelines and some policy statements, they're all things that people can start with tomorrow to at least start to nut out, even if it's just on your own computer, as you talk to others in your team about these things, and be professional. And that's a sage piece of advice. And your other input there, which I thought was great, asking yourself the question, can we do it better somehow? And that seems so simple, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point that the reason why we've continued to manage animals in the same way for, let's face it, probably hundreds of years, is because it works. It's efficient, it's quick, it ticks a lot of boxes when it comes to animal management, particularly when we're moving small animals from one enclosure to another. But one of the things that I feel really strongly about is that it's time really for us to, as an industry, is to think about what's right for the animal. So putting it back onto the agenda for the animal rather than the human being. And I think that when it comes to human beings, we're very concerned about cost and time management and resource management. But the animal doesn't care about that stuff. And I think it's important that we really consider that carefully. And also in terms of animal training particularly, is that we constantly strive to improve. So once we have got something established, it's not good enough just to say, now we train animals, therefore animal welfare is now provided for. We have to continually reevaluate it. One of the big subjects that I'm hearing about a lot from my contemporaries, and you talk about it a lot, Ryan, yourself, is this now thinking, okay, we're training an animal, but are we giving them sufficient amount of choice and control within our animal training and behaviour management programs, and how can we enhance that? So yes, we've got to get it started, we've got to look for alternatives, and we've got to improve, but we've got to continually improve and reevaluate as we go forward.
Fantastic. And I like that you said choice and control in there. I am hoping that we talk more and more on this subject. If you listening want to know more about Mark Kingston-Jones, he is a fantastic person, and I'm very inspired by the work that him and his team at Team Bite are doing in Shape of Enrichment. So you can check out a conversation with him. I think by the time we release this episode, it'll be 3 episodes previous to this one. So go to www.animaltrainingacademy.com, click on the podcast link, and you can find the conversation with Mark Kingston-Jones there. I'm conscious of the time today, Jim, because I know that you have you're at work right now and you've got a day ahead of you. So I'm going to restrain myself because I have a million questions for you. But we're going to move on. Just before we do to the next question, I just want to just touch on your other roles right now. Maybe talk about BIAZA, Behaviour Management Committee. What do they do, and your role as a training group and as an instructor with BIAZA.
Okay, so yeah, so my role within ZSL incorporates and overseeing the 2 behaviour management committees that were set up 7 or 8 years ago, and that role is I'm very lucky because I've got some really great people that are on those committees, and actually they run themselves. So all the guys that look after those committees, we've got Matt and Tom up at Whipsnade Zoo, and Lisa and Jacob down here, amongst a whole load of other reps that help out. And their role is to continue to promote and encourage the use of training and enrichment across the 2 zoos. Also, their job is to make sure that there's the events that we coordinate here. So we do these educational workshops, both in-house and for the Biaza and Iyaza communities. That they run those, so they host them and they set them all up, and that's an awful lot of work. And they also evaluate all the enrichment that we do around the zoo using a template that Matt O'Leary up at Whipsnade put together. So that's one role, and that actually feeds into the role that I have with Biaza. So Biaza is a fantastic organisation, the British and Irish Association of Zoos and Aquaria. It's a really active group, and we've done some quite interesting things through the group. And originally it started as a small focus group, which in itself is just something that is a short-term measure. So animal training focus group was designed to kind of put together some kind of coherence, if you like, for animal training and offer some guidelines to the community. However, it quickly worked out that it wasn't going to be enough to be a short-term group. This was too big a subject. And in fact, Kirsten, the director, was quite keen on creating something a little bit more, a little bit bigger. And with that regard, that we are now a working group. So we have the same status as the taxonomic group. So mammals, birds, herps, etc., which is really significant because it means that for the first time really in the British and Irish zoo and aquaria community, that behaviour management has a very, very strong voice on the Living Collections Committee. And some of the things that we do is we organise education, an education programme which incorporates species-specific training and enrichment workshops in various zoos. We also have a representation on the Animal Behaviour and Training Council, which is a government body that regulates animal behaviourists and trainers across the UK. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to add zookeepers to that register. We want there to be a registered practitioner in every single zoo in the UK and zoo and aquarium in the UK, so that the credibility and professionalism of our industry, the animal training and behaviour management industry, is continually being developed. So these are some of the things I do in the UK. I'm really lucky to have a very strong association with Annette Pedersen over in Copenhagen Zoo, who is not just one of the best animal trainers I've ever worked with, but has been absolutely instrumental in creating a movement for the use of animal training to improve welfare across European zoos, having set up the Iyaza training group and also some courses through the Iyaza Academy, which is the organisation that organises all the education programmes across the European zoos. So I've been lucky enough to work with Annette on that, and we did a very well received seminar in Copenhagen Zoo last year, and that was all about maximising welfare potential, animal welfare potential, using trained behaviour and how we can improve and enhance our already good animal training programs. So that, in a nutshell, is my extracurricular activities, if you like.
Fantastic, and thank you so much for sharing. That was a lot of fun to learn about, Jim. For our next question, I wanted to talk about something I know that you're passionate about, and this is problem solving. Can you run us through a little bit of information about the strategy you use, Jim? And I've got a bit of a doozy here for you. What would you say are the top 5 most important things we should be considering when developing our problem solving skill set?
Whoa, Ryan, that is that is hardcore. Okay. Well, first of all, what I'll say is that for me, problem solving in my role comes in 2 different parts. And one of the parts of the problem solving area that I'm concerned about is helping keepers succeed in their animal training programs. And the first thing that I look at is what is the best way that we can set the conditions for the animal to succeed within that environment that the keeper is working in. So problem solving in that regard is something I do every single day with the keepers. But we also are very concerned with problem solving of undesired behaviours, so-called undesired behaviours. And so the 2 areas are very, very different, although the same things really apply, which is the first thing that you have to do is to study. You have to do your research. So before you even think about a training program or thinking about a behaviour intervention for an undesired behaviour, You have to think about how you're going to assimilate the information or collect the information. So behavioural studies for me are really important. So whether that's a study of the individual's behaviour, or whether that's looking at the way that the environment's set up, all these things you need to work out and study before you start. So that would be top of the list, is pre-planning or pre-problem solving, if you like, figuring out what's going on. Then, of course, the setting the conditions. So setting the conditions is number one of any kind of training program or behaviour intervention. Well, I was very lucky and fortunate enough to complete the Living and Learning with Animals course that Dr. Susan Friedman does, and I know that you're also full of respect and admiration for that lady. A brilliant teacher, and really helped us here at the zoo figure out how we were going to apply our thoughts processes and problem-solving processes to behaviour interventions. And I know there's lots of other hierarchies of behaviour change out there, but I really like using her one because I think she's obviously got a real understanding of the way the zoo community works. And it looks at what's going on with the animal from a medical standpoint, and then it also looks at the environment before even thinking about things like positive reinforcement. And I love the roadblocks towards the end when you get towards the things like the positive punishment. So when it comes to problem solving for behaviour interventions, we try and be very systematic with our approach, but it all starts with a good, sound behavioural analysis and study of the individual animal and the behaviour in question, or the conditions that you're planning on doing your training in. That's not 5, is it, Ryan? Sorry.
Well, we'll let you off. You said it's early in the morning.
Yeah, it is early, yeah.
So if you're wondering what Jim's talking about with regards to the behavioural hierarchy, if you once again head to the podcast section on animaltrainingacademy.com and scroll back a little bit to the Dr. Friedman episode, and if you go to the write-up on that episode, there'll be a link to that on her website, so you can see what Jim's talking about. But I am on the same page as you, Jim. That is something that I use to align my compass. Can you give us any examples of some problem solving you've done at ZSL? Is there anything that sticks out in your mind as what would have appeared to be a potentially challenging situation at the start and some innovative solution you found?
One of the most interesting cases over the last couple of years that I've worked in is with our Asiatic lions. Asiatic lions are fantastic animals. Really enjoyed working with them over the last few years with some amazing colleagues of mine that have taught me lots about their behaviour. And we have some really interesting training programs going on with them. Now, we built a brand new lion enclosure in 2016 called Land of the Lions. It was a really important event, opened by the Queen, so it was an amazing experience. And so we moved our lions back from Whipsnade, where they were housed temporarily while we were building the enclosure. And although the enclosure was absolutely extraordinary, an enormous space in the middle of London for lions, the lions didn't like it very much. So we had to think of ways to help those animals overcome their initial response to being in that enclosure, which was one of a little bit of fear. So a couple of things they'd never experienced before was people walking above them and looking down on them. And so there's these visitor walkways. So that's something we had to overcome. We had to overcome the fact that this was a space that was about 6 times bigger and more complex than anything they've experienced before, because they were born here in London Zoo in the old enclosure. And there was other things about the enclosure that had changed so much from when they were here before, that they had lots and lots to overcome before they were going to use that space. And we needed to do it relatively quickly, because from the period of time they arrived until when we opened to the public was only about 2 months. Which sounds like quite a long time, but for lions in a new enclosure really probably isn't. So we used our behaviour intervention hierarchy. We did some studies of the animals. We had CCTV cameras put up, and we had a dedicated researcher who was here, Giovanni, looking into their behaviour, and we gathered loads of information. And what we did was we started off with a simple desensitisation to the space. So the idea was that we needed these animals, or wanted these animals, to be using the whole space and enjoy the enclosure and they weren't even coming out from their inside dens because they were a little bit intimidated by this new space. So the desensitization and counter conditioning process, which I think is best explained in a pendulum, which is you have a fear response to a novel stimuli, you use desensitization to get them down to a neutral place, and then use counter conditioning to swing that pendulum right up to being in a happy place. And I have to credit Susan Friedman with that analogy as well, because I think it works perfectly for me. So we used desensitization, which essentially allowed the lions to explore this area in their own terms overnight, which is something that we weren't doing to begin with. Once they started to explore a little bit overnight, then we were able to the counter condition for the behaviour of looking up and seeing people above them as a positive experience, whereas before it made them run back inside. We would call them over to a point, and then we'd call their names, and if we had any kind of eye contact or any kind of recognition, we'd reinforce it with a chicken wing. And gradually, whenever they looked up and saw a person, it was a positive experience instead of being something that was that elicited a fear response. Once we did that, we could start using lots and lots of enrichment around the enclosure, both food and non-food items. So this combination of positive reinforcement training, of loads and loads of enrichment, of using recall behaviours, fast recall behaviours, and get them to move quickly across areas which engaged them in the environment, had a profound impact. And within the 2 months that we had those animals in, they became very confident in that enclosure. And that's one example of problem solving that I think taught me a lot and helped me to understand just what we need to do to make animals' lives in captivity the best we can possibly be, the best they can possibly be.
I love it, and great information, great example. And I know there's a ton of people who listen to the show for whom this is going to be super beneficial. So thank you very much for sharing. I'm looking at the time, appreciating once again that you've got to get on with your days. I'm going to push on because once again, as per normal, I've got a ton of questions, but I'm going to restrain myself. Jim, in your role, you understandably, and you've mentioned this already, you work with a large array of different keepers with varying levels of experience and varying levels of skill set. And you build upon what you were saying about this before. What advice can you give to other people who might be in your situation? Talk about how you manage this as a trainer of the trainers. What's helped you be successful working with such a diverse group of experience levels and understanding of training?
It's a really good point, that. And I think that it's worth pointing out, Ryan, straight away that not everybody is going to be a brilliant animal trainer. And whenever I'm in a situation where I have to teach someone that's brand new to training and that perhaps doesn't have an innate understanding of what it is to train an animal or to manipulate animals' behaviour or modify animals' behaviour, then it is quite challenging. But my philosophy on it is quite simple, which is that the best results come when you don't worry too much about the target behaviour. So one of the things that I've been really passionate about over the last couple of years is using foundation behaviours in order to create animals that are more tuned in to the learning process. And the foundations, as Annetta Peterson is very passionate about teaching, are the simple things that you can train an animal to do that can lead to much more invasive things. So, for example, if you target train your animal, you teach an audio recall, teach it how to sit still, station well, and teach it to go into a box. These 4 things are really crucial. And you could add into that something that the animal can do if it's not showing you the correct behaviour that you're asking for. I think in the marine mammal world, they sometimes call this an LRS, or a least reinforcing scenario. And one of the things I think works really well is simple eye contact. So if the animal is calm in front of you and gives you eye contact, or whatever it is, species specific, then you can reinforce that behaviour if it hasn't done the correct one that you're asking for. If you've got all those things in the animal's behavioural repertoire, training repertoire already, then you can, then someone who's learning to train is less likely to make a mistake. And those animals are more likely to have the fundamental understanding that a person trying to teach them something new is not a threat, which in the zoo world is one of the hardest things to overcome, because I get asked all the time, what is the hardest animal to train? And to me, it's nothing to do with species or individuals. It's all to do with their past history with people, because that's what really has an impact on whether an animal is going to be cooperative with a human being. So I know I've probably gone off a little bit of the question there in the end, but I think that what's important is if you have a lot of people that are going to be training animals, you need to choose carefully your primary trainer. You need to do it on the animal's terms rather than the development of the human being. And you need to teach the animals the fundamental basis of behaviour and training that will allow those animals to learn and to be taught by people that aren't the most skillful trainers.
Hey, Jim, thank you so much for all of this. We are sadly nearly at the end now, but that's okay because we're heading into one of my favourite parts of the podcast show, and you've already shared a great story. So we'll just do one more quick story before we finish, Jim. Can you share another story from your experience of the years you've spent honing your skills at ZSL there? One story that sticks out, an important lesson it taught you along the way.
Oh my God, that is so hard because, as you can imagine, I've been working in the field that I really enjoy the most, which is training animals for medical and husbandry care. And I actually first started in 2006 with Malayan black tapir. Sorry, a Malayan tapir, not a Malayan black tapir, Malayan tapir. And I started this journey, if you like, towards using animal training for medical and husbandry care way back in 2006. So before I took this job on, long before, I was already going out into the wider zoo and experiencing this in my own time because I was just so fascinated in it. And so the first training program I got involved with was with Malayan tapirs. And we needed to do blood draws with these Malayan tapirs to test for various things. And I remember with my kind of training for demonstrations head on that we were so clear in our teaching back then, which was the first thing that you need to teach an animal to do is learn the bridging stimulus. So the event marker that tells the animal that the right behaviour has been reached. You need to everything needs a target, everything needs a clicker, and it was all that kind of stuff, or a whistle. And I think that I remember going to the first training session and we used a target, we had our reinforcer, and I had the whistle to teach the bridge. Obviously, you need to charge the bridge. You need to tell the animal that it actually has a meaning. So the very first thing we did was try and hand feed the animal and while I blew the whistle. Now, the whistle was a high-pitched whistle, and as soon as I blew it, the tapir ran a mile because their communication is in whistling. They basically make these very high-pitched whistling sounds to warn each other of danger. And I remember thinking, hang on a minute. So what that taught me, if you like, was that no one animal's the same. And that is so important, that every single individual animal, every single species needs a bespoke and customized training program. You should never think about all the things that are totally taught to you because you're going to be learning all the time and animals are going to be teaching you and your colleagues and your peers are going to be teaching you new things all the time. And most importantly, do your research before you start your training, because if I'd have learned a little bit about tapir communication, then I wouldn't have made a mistake. So that one moment really taught me a hell of a lot about what I needed to do as an animal trainer. And one thing I would say is that I've never stopped learning, and I'm never going to stop learning. This is the biggest lesson to me is that every year someone teaches me something new, whether it's you guys doing these podcasts and all the brilliant people you've had on here, and all the people you've had on, I admire and I listen to these shows. Whether it's conferences I go to, people that I meet, my colleagues here at ZSL, always learning something new. And that incident with the tapir taught me to kind of study your animal, but remember you're going to need to adapt and change continually if you're going to be a good animal trainer.
Love it. Fantastic lessons. And that does... Sadly, now they bring us to our final question for this episode. And potentially you just answered it then, Jim. So you may want to just say that, or maybe you've got some other things, and I'm sure you do, that you want to inject in here. Moving forward over the next 5 to 10 years, what would you really like to see happen in the animal training world?
Well, we talked about this over in New Zealand, didn't we, Ryan? That we think that, certainly from my perspective, I think that in the UK, certainly, we're in a pretty good position whereby animal training is now considered not just an added extra fun part of the day or worse, that it's actually detrimental to animal welfare. But it's an accepted part of animal management. I do believe that now, and that's happened certainly, over the last 5 to 10 years in the UK. And so lots of people are training animals. Now, for me, the next phase is about how we apply our animal training. We need an element of extreme professionalism going forward. We need to make sure that the next phase of this journey involves experts registering, registered practitioners in the field of animal behaviour analysis, getting to work into zoos. We need to explore the concepts of contra-free loading when we're managing animals in captivity. We need to bring more science into the field, getting rid of any of the existing stigmas that pin animal training with any kind of circus or anything like that. So a degree of professionalism, an injection of scientific principles, continual improvement in terms of giving animals greater amounts of choice during training programs. For example, choice of reinforcers, evaluating those reinforcers once you've tested them with the animal, giving the animal a choice of which trainer it uses and what time of day and the training location, because we tend to make that stuff according to the way we want to do it. So we choose the time, the trainer, the location, giving the animals more choice in those regards. Giving the animals more considering more about when we're building enclosures, what the animal is going to, what the behaviour of the animal is going to be like when it comes in, and not just thinking about visitor experience or breeding or conservation. Think about the whole holistic process of what animals are going to be like in those enclosures, including how we're going to actually physically be able to train them and enrich them. So I think that as an industry, we've still got a hell of a way to go. We're on the right path, but the next 5 or 10 years are crucial. And I think it's all going to be led by the animal caregivers, the people that are on the ground making these things happen. So my advice is just, good luck with it all. Everyone should carry on doing their training, make sure it's done professionally, and keep communicating with each other. Learning whenever you can from any source, and that includes, of course, the Animal Training Academy. I think that in the next 5 to 10 years, what I would like to see is an increased diversity in training of other taxonomic groups apart from mammals. So we have a lot of people are training birds for husbandry procedures, but it still needs to grow, as does the use of training in the herp world. And I've got a feeling that the biggest thing in maybe 20 years is going to be lots more invertebrate training. And so that could be a really exciting thing.
Such great vision, and thank you for saying those kind words about ATA and all the other people out there doing similar stuff to me as well. Credit goes to them as well as obviously to you, Jim, and everyone in their organisations. Keep on keeping on. We're all working really hard to make these things transpire as we move forward over the coming years. As mentioned, though, that does sadly bring us to the end. But before we wrap up, Jim, from myself and on behalf of everyone listening, thank you so much for making time to come on the show today. It's really appreciated.
It's been a pleasure, Ryan, and great to connect with your members. And I hope there's other opportunities to catch up with people going forward.
We do, of course, really appreciate all of you tuning in today as well. And if you have enjoyed this episode and you were interested in carrying on the conversation about the most positive, least intrusive ways of influencing behaviour, then as mentioned at the start of the episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.animaltrainingacademy.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn all about how you can connect with like-minded, positive, reinforcement-based animal trainers from around the world. Whether you train or are thinking about training dogs, cats, other pets, birds, zoo animals, implementing techniques within your vet clinic or any other area where behaviour management is required, then you will love all the different ways you can join in the forums, WhatsApp chats, private Facebook group, or in one of the members-only live web classes. There's something there for absolutely everyone, and we're looking forward to having you join the family. That's it for this episode, though. We'll wrap it up there. Thanks again so much for listening. But for now, it's time to hit the road, silly toad. You'll hear from us again soon.